This story began in a high school where we find our four-eyed protagonist, Zufei, wearing a sad expression, staring outside the window, lost in thought. Zufei was just an ordinary guy who would never get noticed in a crowd. He was the kind of loser who had been destined to live a boring life hustling with a 9-to-5 and would never get laid in this lifetime. But there was something no one saw coming. This girl, Xia Chu. Xia Chu was an academic topper, brilliant, pretty, and curvy. She was a school senior and the daughter of a very rich family. It was certain she would enter the family business after graduation. As it should be, she and the protagonist were like two lines that would never intersect, ever. While in class, someone touched our protagonist's shoulder. It turned out that it was Xia Chu who asked if he wanted some milk and bread so they could eat together. Startled, Zufei declined, stating that he had things to do and would not be able to accompany her. She then asked if they could eat together the next day, but Zufei replied that he would also be busy. She immediately broke down in tears and asked if she was bothering him or if he was acting up because of her confession. Crying profusely, she said she couldn't help but confess as she was scared another shoddy might take him away. Staring at her, Zufei remembered that before her confession, they were actually cool. On the day she confessed, he was just playing Call of Duty Mobile on his phone when his roommate rushed to call his attention to the fiasco happening downstairs. Getting downstairs, Zufei lost all composure and had a mucus burst when he spotted Xia Chu lighting some candles. That was not even the shocker. What shocked Zufei was when he realized that the girl had used the candles in spelling out the letters, "Let's be together, Zufei." Seeing this, our boy was shocked because he had just met this chick a few weeks ago and didn't understand why she would go the extra mile to make such a confession. Meanwhile, one of Xia Chu's friends approached her, assuring her that as the prettiest girl in the school, there was no way in hell Zufei could possibly reject her. But Xia Chu replied that she was still worried about how Zufei might respond. The girl looked a bit confused and then asked Xia Chu why she had decided to make such a big confession if she hadn't thought the whole thing through. Xia Chu knocked herself in the head, saying she hadn't thought much about it. With a mischievous grin, the girl thought it would be best to give Xia Chu a strong dose of motivation. Folding her arms, the girl lied, saying that the other day, she had seen Zufei and some baddies in his class heading to the library together. Hearing this, the gullible Xia Chu believed and was fuming with jealousy, while the girl just smirked like a true devil's advocate. Determined like never before, Xia Chu made a fist and then stated that she would confess. Shouting at the top of her lungs, she loudly announced that she liked Zufei and then asked if they could be together. Upon hearing this, the boys began to tease Zufei, calling him a Chad with a strong riz game. Embarrassed, Zufei flew back inside the room like a cat out of water, saying it was impossible for him and Xia Chu to be together. Not understanding, the guys asked if he was serious, but Mr. Heartbreaker, already lying on the bed with a covered bedsheet, simply replied, saying all he wanted now was to get some sleep. Confused, one of the guys asked if he would just leave the girl standing outside, and our boy calmly replied, saying he had no answer for her. As a result, there was no answer to her confession. The guy angrily carried Zufei while wrapped in the bedsheet like a croissant and yelled, saying Zufei didn't know he was living the dream of most losers while the other guy tried to calm the big guy. At that moment, Zufei thought that even though Xia Chu must be feeling utterly embarrassed down there, he just wasn't her Prince Charming in shining armor, but rather a senior named Gao Yang. He recalled that a few days before, while in the library, the blonde hot face had approached him. According to the whispers echoing through the library, Gang Yao was hailed as the most handsome guy in school, with a face that could rival Henry Cavill's. Not only that, he was also the student president. Gao Yang cleared his throat and said he was there to discuss about Xia Chu and then sat opposite Zufei. Nervous as hell, Zufei tried telling the guy that he just met Xia Chu a while ago, so there was actually nothing romantic going on between them. Gao Yang said he was aware, but to avoid any misunderstanding, he just wanted him to know that he was Xia Chu's future husband. He explained that when they were younger, their parents had fixed their marriage, but Xia Chu kept refusing to marry him. However, he didn't plan on giving up on her. He added that Xia Chu was the heir to her father's business, so she would need an alpha male that could support her. Hearing this, Zufei became nervous, so he stammered a little but finally told the gold digger that he could only achieve his evil mission if Xia Chu liked him. Gao Yang stood from his seat and said if Xia Chu was a normal girl, then of course she could love whoever she wanted, but she was the heir to the great Xia enterprise. With a mischievous smirk, Gao Yang asked if love would help her manage tens of thousands of dollars or tens of billions of market value. He also asked if love could also help her get back on her feet if her company was in trouble. Staring at Zhu Fei with a spark of tension, Gao Yang pointed out that one careless move could ruin everything for Xia Chu, and getting married to a horrendous loser like Zhu Fei would definitely end her life. Back in the present, Xia Chu said she was willing to wait until Zhu Fei accepted her confession. But our boy replied, saying his answer would always remain the same. She remarked that it was okay and then began to leave, saying she would get out of his hair for the time being but promised to send milk to him the next day. Zhu Fei sighed in relief and started to head to his room, but that was when he accidentally bumped his head into someone's back. It turned out to be our gold digger, Henry Cavill, with two other guys who instantly grabbed Zhu Fei by the shoulder and asked him to follow them. They led him to the rooftop of the school building. Frightened, Zhu Fei tried explaining that there was absolutely nothing going on between him and Xia Chu. But Gao Yang said it seemed like the conversation they had the last time fell on deaf ears. Without hesitation, Gao Yang dazed Zhu Fei with a face-arranging slap that crashed him onto the floor. His glasses came off, and blood spilled from every opening on his face. Zhu Fei tried explaining that it was a misunderstanding, but Gao Yang clenched his fist and said only a certified bonehead would believe that there was nothing going on between them. Angrily, Gao Yang yelled at Zhu Fei, saying he would show him that Xia Chu wasn't the kind of shoddy that a rotten trash like him could touch. At that moment, Zhu Fei tried getting up, but Gao Yang unleashed his C. Ronaldo skills, playing him like a ball and crashing him over the railings of the rooftop. As Zhu Fei plummeted from the top of the school building, a blue aura suddenly engulfed him. Just before he cemented himself to the hard ground, the aura intensified, and upon impact, a massive explosion shook the area. Our boy lay sprawled on the ground, unconscious, dressed in medieval attire and a quaint hat. He finally regained consciousness but could feel an excruciating pain all over his body. Shocked, he wondered how the hell he had survived such a fall from such a high-rise building. Suddenly, he noticed mushrooms sprouting from a tree and some roots lying on the ground. He wondered why there were rare medicinal items everywhere. Observing his surroundings, he considered the fact that he might be dead and was probably in heaven. But then he questioned why this heaven was filled with mushrooms instead of angels. Just then, a boy pointed at him and asked his mother why the crazy man was so excited at seeing the poisonous mushroom. As they hurriedly began to leave, his mother responded, saying that every year, scholars failed the exam, turned to smoking weed, and eventually lost their minds. On the other hand, Zhu Fei was curious as to why the nosy mother and her ugly-ass son were dressed in ancient attires, and that was when it dawned on him that he might have teleported. Puzzled, he muttered to himself that if he had indeed teleported, then he should have some kind of superpowers, but he still felt like his body hadn't changed a bit. Suddenly, he spotted a horse galloping towards him at full speed. The horse, clearly wounded by arrows and carrying an unconscious red-haired girl, leaped high into the air right above Zhu Fei, scaring the pants off him. The injured horse then crashed to the ground, and the unconscious red-haired fell off the horse right in front of him. Zhu Fei knelt in front of the girl, and that was when he noticed that an arrow had pierced her BBL melons. Fortunately, the wound was not too deep, but the arrow tip might have been poisoned. So, to prevent the area from being affected, Zhu Fei decided to pull out the arrow from her milk bag. As he pulled out the arrow, a swirl of golden energy appeared from nowhere and flowed into the wounded area. Zhu Fei also noticed something strange, like a butterfly fluttering within the golden aura, and wondered what it could be. But before he could make sense of it, the golden energy surged into his body as well. Later that evening, Zhu Fei sat beside the red-haired girl after tending to her wound. It was then that he heard her softly whisper that she needed water. Realizing she was finally awake, Zhu Fei couldn't contain his excitement. As the hottie struggled to open her eyes, Zhu Fei excitedly called her beautiful, and then offered her his hot creamy juice to drink. However, staring at his face, the red-haired cringed at how disgusting his face was. So she sat up even though Zhu Fei tried warning her against moving her body so as not to strain the injury. As the girl stared at him in confusion, Zhu Fei frantically introduced himself and then asked for her name. The red-haired was disgusted by the sound of his voice, so she angrily drew her sword and was about to neuter his virgin plot gun. Scared to the bones, Zhu Fei started to beg and apologize for calling her beautiful when he should have called her a feminist instead. With a look of utter disgust, the girl sneered and asked how he dared to keep talking, then added that it was clear he had a death wish. She shoved her blade into his mouth to silence him for good, but Zhu Fei panicked and begged like a girl, asking her to chill. He pointed out that she was being ungrateful, especially since he had just saved her life. Surprised, the red-haired cutie asked if he was the one who had bandaged her. Zhu Fei replied that it was obviously the one since there was no one else with them. Upon hearing this, the girl knelt before him, called him her benefactor, and then offered to give him anything he wanted. Zhu Fei smiled with all his 32 teeth on display and then said he needed her help to become the emperor so they could both conquer the world together. The girl immediately grew angry and pointed her sword at his neck, threatening to slice off his head if he was a rebel. Frightened, Zhu Fei said he was just joking, but the girl said his jokes would be the end of him soon. Zhu Fei then informed her that he was a foreigner and he didn't know the rules of the land. Even worse, he had no idea where the heck he was. With a confused expression, the girl told him he was in the Yan Kingdom on the North Continent. Dumbfounded, Zhu Fei wondered if this kingdom she talked about was even on Earth. Just then, it struck him that he might not even be on Earth, considering the way the red-haired was dressed. Our boy then introduced himself and then asked for her name. The smoking hottie introduced herself as Huang Fu, revealing that she was also a marquis of the kingdom. Shocked, Zhu Fei asked if it was possible for a lady to become a marquis. Huang Fu became angry and then demanded to know if he was against feminism and a woman defending her home and her country. But Zhu Fei immediately apologized for his stupid comment. Standing over him, Huang Fu revealed that her family was among the top 3 billionaires in the kingdom, and anything he asked for, she was certain they could provide. Placing his hand on his chin like a cunning bastard, Zhu Fei paused for a moment, weighing his options. He pondered how best to use this chick to his advantage, whether to build a harem of women, amass wealth, or rise to the status of a high-ranking official. But his thought was suddenly disrupted when Huang Fu asked for her chest plate. She immediately grabbed Zhu Fei's shirt, threatening to chop off his balls and feed them to the vultures if he didn't provide her chest plate. But Zhu Fei told her that he had taken the plates off when he was treating her wound. Angrily, she called him a stupid face and then asked who gave him permission to take off her melon plates. She began to remove the bandages on her balloons, but Zhu Fei tried stopping her, warning that her wound hadn't healed yet. Ignoring this warning, she took off the bandage, and Zhu Fei was shocked to see that the wound on her pleasure hills had completely healed. Still pissed, Huang Fu shouted, asking who permitted him to touch her sacred pillows. Without a second thought, she started to draw her sword, calling him a bloody, cultured bastard. She immediately attacked him with the sword, but Zhu Fei narrowly dodged it and began to run. But the angry girl just chased after him, threatening to end him. As he ran, Zhu Fei continued to beg, asking why she wanted to end him because he had done no wrong but only touched her floaties because he wanted to heal her. After a while, the angry chick suddenly stopped and then decided to engage her dead brain cells. She calmly remarked that after 8 years in the army, having seen firsthand that there was no real difference between men and women, she found it utterly wrong to send the guy to the afterlife over something so trivial. Flashing his 3 fingers, Zhu Fei stated that she had tried to end his life 3 times and then asked why. Huang Fu replied, saying the first time was because he made a rude remark, the second time was because he had disrespected her, and the last time was because he had touched her birthmark. Zhu Fei shouted, asking what if he touched her birthmark. Huang Fu clarified, saying all women of the Huang Fu family had a birthmark of the phoenix pattern, and if touched by any man, it would dissipate. Confused at hearing this, Zhu Fei wondered what kind of magical birthmark it was and its function. Slightly embarrassed, Huang Fu explained that women of her family had the birthmark in a private spot on their bodies and naturally could not be touched by any man. If, in any situation, it was touched by a man, then they would have to marry each other. Shocked at hearing this, Zhu Fei replied, saying it was a stupid tradition, and then asked what would happen if the birthmark was touched by her brother or father. Slightly irritated, Huang Fu responded by saying the birthmark would only dissipate if it was touched by someone not related by blood. Noticing his hesitation, Huang Fu said by the looks of things he didn't want to marry her. Zhu Fei began to sweat nervously before blurting out that it wasn't that he didn't want to marry her, but it was just that he was a hopeless loser, unworthy of marrying a hot mummy milker like her. Staring sideways, Huang Fu pointed out that there was another alternative if he didn't want to marry her. She revealed that if a daughter of the Huang Fu was touched by a man and they didn't want to marry each other, then the lady would have to eliminate the guy, and the birthmark would naturally return. With a desolate look, she assured Zhu Fei that if she ended his life now, then she would repay his kindness in his next life. but Zhu Fei panicked and shouted that he had saved her life, so she would have to return the favor now. Huang Fu explained that it was because he had saved her life that she had given him the option to choose. She added that if it had been anyone else, she would have removed his baby-making toy without hesitation. Gritting his teeth and shaking like a scared little bitch, Zhu Fei mentioned that he had made up his mind. He grabbed her legs like a cat and said he was ready to talk about marriage. However, Huang Fu pointed out that before they could marry, he would need to join her family. Thinking deeply, Zhu Fei knew joining her family would not be much of a big deal since she came from a wealthy one anyway. However, he inquired about what would happen if he rejected being a son-in-law to her family. From the murderous stare he received for asking such a question, he felt like his big head had already been stabbed. With no choice, Zhu Fei cried out that since it was his destiny to marry her, so he wouldn't mind joining her family. Huang Fu said since he touched her birthmark, she could have ended his life, but since he saved her life, she had no choice but to marry him. Grabbing his head, Huang Fu playfully teased that as long as he was a member of her family, no one would ever bully him. Following that, Huang Fu sighted pink flowers close by and was completely entranced. Seeing how overjoyed she was, Zhu Fei was surprised because he had never thought there was a girly side aside from the whole feminism and swordsman. Suddenly, he heard the sound of 1,000 horses approaching, and as he turned, he saw a troop of soldiers approaching. A long-haired soldier shouted Marquis, and as Huang Fei moved towards the soldiers, they immediately saluted her. However, Huang Fei told the generals of the battalions not to be so polite. The long-haired soldier moved closer to Huang Fu and said he thanked the heavens she was alive because when they heard that she was attacked, the entire battalion was in chaos. Huang Fu responded by saying she was fine, all thanks to her fiancé, who had saved her, or else she would have been a living sacrifice by now. Hearing fiancé, the soldiers were shocked to their bones. Huang Fu then introduced Zhu Fei as her fiancé, and with a smile, the knucklehead added that he was half a doctor by profession. The soldiers immediately saluted him, and then offered gratitude for saving their Marquis's life. Soon, they set off in a carriage, and along the way, the long-haired soldier introduced himself to Zhu Fei as Huang Kai. He then inquired to know just how Zhu Fei had managed to rizz up the Marquis. Zhu Fei replied, saying she was impressed by his charisma and strength. But Huang Kai doesn't look convinced one bit. He remarked that he couldn't comment much about his character, but he was damn sure Zhu Fei's strength was similar to that of a toddler since he couldn't even ride a horse. Zhu Fei boasted that he could ride a horse, but when the useless weakling tried, he collapsed to the ground like some dirty old rag. Huang Kai stared down at Zhu Fei coldly and said it was obvious he was just a nerdy loser, but he still couldn't understand why the Marquis had taken an interest in such a useless piece of shit. Zhu Fei immediately snapped, saying she was impressed at his incredible Hulk strength after she had attacked him 3 times and failed. Huang Kai replied, saying it was a disgusting lie because the Marquis family's martial arts were ranked among the top 3 in the world. Hearing this, Zhu Fei was instantly shocked because he never believed that Huang Fu was actually that powerful. In a swift move, Huang Kai unsheathed his sword, placed it over Zhu Fei's neck, and said that since he was that strong, it was only fair that they learned from each other. At that moment, Huang Fu approached the guys and backed up Zhu Fei's claim, stating that when she met him, she did attack him 3 times, but he survived. Zhu Fei was a bit confused, wondering why she was going along with his story. Surely, she must really be desperate to marry him. Huang Kai then grabbed Zhu Fei's shoulders and apologized for doubting him, to which Zhu Fei sheepishly replied that it was okay. Sometime later, in a castle, a voice roared, asking who was in the carriage. Another voice replied, saying it was the fiancé of Lord Huang Fu. Everyone then gathered, eager to see the fiancé, and they began to whisper, asking why the Marquis was bringing another fiancé since she already had a marriage contract with the Crown Prince. Another asked why the Marquis would marry a pathetic sissy who couldn't even ride a horse. Inside the carriage, Zhu Fei asked Huang Fu why he wasn't allowed to ride a horse. Huang Fu answered, saying he could ride one in the future when he had learned. Meanwhile, in the imperial palace, a voice shouted, calling everyone trash. Turned out it was the Crown Prince who asked his subjects why they hadn't yet gotten any information on the fiancé Huang Fu brought. The men replied, saying the fiancé was so well protected, and none of their men could meet him. However, the Crown Prince, Zhao Zhen, loudly instructed them to use whatever method necessary to find the ugly bastard who had stolen his woman. On getting inside the castle, Huang Fu told Zhu Fei that she would be busy for a while and would leave him in the hands of Huang Kai. As she left, Zhu Fei asked Huang Kai if she was always that busy. Huang Kai replied, saying the attack on Huang Fu was clearly a conspiracy from her own people, so she definitely would be busy investigating the matter. After this, Huang Kai led Zhu Fei to the military barracks and introduced him to the soldiers, instructing them to follow every command he gave without question. On leaving the barracks, Zhu Fei demanded to know what Huang Kai meant by saying that the marquis had been attacked by her own people. However, Huang Kai declined to say much about the issue. Upon entering the palace, Zhu Fei was both shocked and excited to see the numerous servants at his disposal, each ready to cater to his every need. Just then, someone announced that his bath water was ready. So, Zhu Fei entered the bathroom, took off his clothes, was ready to take a bath, and was excited to be alone after a while. However, he suddenly remembered the way the servants had stared at him in hostility just after Huang Kai left. But as he relaxed in the bathwater, he brushed it off as just mere overthinking. Suddenly, a pretty girl entered the bathroom, claiming she had come to serve him. She took off her clothes, exposing her ginormous melons, and the cultured virgin immediately had a sudden nosebleed. The girl then announced that she was just an ordinary servant girl who was sent to cream his sausage. Zhu Fei then tried to shut his eyes from staring at her plotful body, but the pervy innate mechanism of a man just won't let his damn eyes close. The seductress, already in the bathtub, smiled mischievously. Grabbing Zhu Fei by the shoulders, she teased, saying she found it hard to believe he was still a virgin. Zhu Fei finally switched on his top G-jean by turning his face away from the plotful girl, asking her to get out, but she kept insisting. He told the girl that he was a good boy and didn't need her sweet cheeks on his hard bone. Realizing Zhu Fei was too much of a useless virgin to fold, the girl then said, in that case, she would have to do this. The crazy girl suddenly began to scream for help, saying Zhu Fei had tried to molest her. The servants immediately rushed in and were shocked at the rated 18 scene. One of them asked how dare Zhu Fei cheat on the marquis and then called Zhu Fei a perv from the pit of hell. The servants then dragged Zhu Fei before the old housekeeper, Fu, and asked what punishment they should impose on him. The old man then ordered them to lock Zhu Fei up in the woodshed till the marquis returned. Hearing this, Zhu Fei was shocked and confused at what was happening, but the evil temptress gave an evil smirk. Without wasting time, one of the men kicked Zhu Fei inside the prison like a piece of trash, and while on the floor, Zhu Fei finally realized that it was all a setup. He wondered if he would be locked in there forever and tried to escape, but discovered that the iron railing of the prison was sturdy. Even worse, 2 guards were situated just outside his prison to prevent him from escaping. At that moment, he regretted ever making the decision to become a superfluous son-in-law. He lay on the wood shavings on the floor in sadness and somehow managed to fall asleep amidst the horrible situation. While deep in slumberland, a whirl of golden aura started emanating from his ears and then filled the entire prison. A bright light started shining from the window of the prison, but the 2 moronic guards were already dozing off and didn't notice what was going on. Suddenly, a portal appeared in the sky, right above the school building. A bald cleaner, sweeping the school grounds while listening to the latest Kendrick Lamar album, was unaware as a bright light exploded just behind him. At that instant, the sound alerted the bald weirdo, so he moved to check what had caused the explosion. That was when he found Zhu Fei sleeping on the grass like a lazy sloth. He immediately slapped Zhu Fei on the leg, yelling at him to wake up and insisting this was no place to be dozing off. Slowly, Zhu Fei began to open his eyes, and when he was fully awake, he was shocked to the bones. He was surprised to see the old school cleaner right before his eyes, so he asked the bald creep if he had crossed over, too. The bald man just stared at him in disgust, wondering if the boy's brain was intact. Scanning the environment, Zhu Fei realized that he had somehow teleported back to school. Holding the back of his head, he wondered if everything about the ancient world had just been nothing but a dream. As he stood up, the cleaner cited a ginseng root in his pocket and then asked what it was. In turn, Zhu Fei asked how long he had been sleeping in the bush, and the cleaner answered saying how the hell would he know? He just found him lying there. Shortly afterward, Zhu Fei arrived at the boy's dorm. On entering his room, his roommates asked if the reason he didn't sleep in the room last night was because he had been smashing Zia Chu's sweet cheeks, but Zhu Fei said nothing like that happened. However, the cultured boys found it difficult to believe and insisted that he must have spent the night with Zia Chu. But Zhu Fei just walked past them, ignoring their clapped faces, and headed to bed. While lying in bed, Zhu Fei pondered on whether the crossover thingy was indeed real or an illusion. If it was real, then that meant that he had gone through life and death situations several times. But then again, he reconsidered, it had to be real. The ginseng root was solid proof of just how real it was. He stared at his phone beside him and wondered if Zia Chu was fine. So, he picked up the phone and dialed her number, determined that after surviving life and death situations, he no longer feared confronting his feelings for her. While speaking with Zia Chu on the phone, he was startled when she cried on the other end of the call, saying something terribly wrong happened to her grandpa. Feeling nervously concerned, Zhu Fei asked her to stop crying and then inquired what was wrong with her grandpa. Zia Chu said her old man's health had always been bad, but this time, the old geezer had a seizure and was sent to the ICU. Zhu Fei asked what hospital and then assured her that he was coming over to keep her company. Zia Chu responded by saying she liked the fact that he was a gentle simp who cared about how she felt even though she was aware he was at odds with her family. Hearing this, Zhu Fei paused for a second and reflected on the fact that he didn't have the courage to face her family. But at that moment, over the phone, he overheard Zia Chu's mom asking a guy to get her freshly grown ginseng for the old man's health, no matter the cost. Zhu Fei suddenly remembered the ginseng lying on the bed that he had brought from the other world. So, while still on the call, he quickly asked Zia Chu if they were searching for freshly grown ginseng. On confirming that he had heard right, he told Zia Chu that he happened to have one with him that had not been picked up for more than a week. Zia Chu immediately turned to her mom and announced that she didn't need to find the ginseng anymore because her junior in school said he got some freshly picked ones. With a slight frown on her face, the mom said she had warned her several times to stay away from that broke boy from a wretched family, and there was no way in hell the hopeless brokey could have such a rare item. While Zhu Fei listened on the phone, the mom said the broke ass was just making it up just to get close to Zia Chu. However, Zhu Fei wasn't surprised. He had always expected Zia Chu's family to react that way towards him, and that was the main reason he had always avoided her. On the other hand, Zia Chu shouted at her mother, saying even though Zhu Fei was broke as hell and couldn't afford a nice haircut, he would never lie about such emotional matters. She went on to tell her mom that if he had asked her out, she would likely already be pregnant with his child. She said he didn't even need to do much. She would force him to marry her on the grounds of having his child. The mother, fuming with anger, asked what kind of voodoo charm the boy might have used on her to make her. A rich kid say such things about the scum of the earth. However, Zia Chu ignored her, walked away, and while still on the call with Zhu Fei, she informed him that her driver would pick him up at the school gate. But the mother shouted across the hospital hall that she would never allow an irrelevant bastard to come an inch close to the hospital. A few minutes later, our boy wore his newest Air Force One and stepped out of the school gate. Even though Zia Chu's family hated his guts, our boy was determined to go anyway because it was a matter of her grandpa's health. Suddenly, a voice asked if he was Mr. Zhu Fei. A sparkling black limo appeared parked in front, and the driver informed Zhu Fei that Zia Chu had asked him to come pick him up. Seeing the expensive wheels, Zhu Fei and some other dudes behind him were both shocked and speechless. As they drove to the hospital, the driver stole a side glance at Zhu Fei, who was lounging in the back of the limo like he was the boss, sipping red wine. The driver casually mentioned that Zia Chu had often talked about him. Turning to the back, the driver added that he wasn't the only one who knew about him. In fact, all the staff had seen a photo of him because Zia Chu had always planned to bring him to the house to ensure no one looked down on him. Lost in thought, Zhu Fei was surprised that Zia Chu would go the extra mile just to prove her love for him. Shortly afterward, they arrived at the hospital. Upon seeing the skyscraper, Zhu Fei realized it was the same hospital belonging to Zia Chu's family. He had always known the Zia Chu family was rich, but he had never expected them to be on Elon Musk's level. Suddenly, Zia Chu appeared and rushed to meet him. He then handed the ginseng, which he kept inside a red box, to her, but she refused, saying he shouldn't give her outside. She asked him to accompany her inside the hospital so everyone would see the Prince Charming who saved her grandfather's life. However, Zhu Fei remarked that he understood her mother's concern for doubting he could be in possession of such a prized item. With a smile on her face, Zia Chu assured him that she never doubted him for a second, and even if the item was fake, then he must have probably seen it wrong. Just then, Zhu Fei surprisingly gave Zia Chu an emotional hug that startled her. Feeling overwhelmed by the show of emotion, Zia Chu told him that all she had ever wanted was his heart, and as long as he always thought about her, she didn't care about anything else. Staring straight into his eyes, she asked if he had experienced anything the day before. Hearing this question, Zhu Fei's heart skipped for a moment, and he wondered if the girl knew anything about his crossing over expedition. With no response, Ziachu muttered that she must be right because Zhu Fei had grown so much in just 24 hours. However, Zhu Fei tried to play it cool and was about to say nothing had happened before someone walked in on them. You already know it's Ziachu's mean mother who immediately ordered Zhu Fei to get his stinky hands off her daughter. Zhu Fei nervously introduced himself, but Ziachu chimed in, stating that Zhu Fei was her boyfriend and that since she was almost done with school, she had every right to have one. The mother angrily replied that she didn't care if the ugly gorilla was her boyfriend or not. To ease the tension, Zhu Fei quickly handed the red box containing the ginseng to the mother. She collected it and said she would show the ginseng to the president of the hospital, Wang, to confirm its authenticity. She added that after testing its authenticity, Ziachu would see the nonsense she was dating. She informed Zhu Fei that Wang was a veteran of the Chinese medicine world and no inferior Chinese medicine would escape his sight. Our boy immediately broke into a cold sweat as he heard the woman mention that if they found out that he had fooled them with a fake medicine, he would never come near her daughter ever again. The mother handed the red box containing the ginseng to the doctor, asking him to authenticate it. The aged man with glasses observed the item like a professional. Then he reported that in all his years of practicing medicine, he had never seen such a fine ginseng, and he would have to administer it immediately, shocking Ziachu's mom. With an immense surge of gratitude, Ziachu immediately threw herself at Zhu Fei and thanked him for saving her grandpa's life. But the mother almost immediately held on to her top and dragged her away from the hug. She exclaimed that even though Zhu Fei had saved the old man, it still meant nothing, and then she asked Zhu Fei to state how much he wanted. Ziachu snapped, asking her mom if she intended to give Zhu Fei money for the ginseng. The mother replied saying after all, that was all the useless beggar wanted. Pointing at Zhu Fei, the woman affirmed that she had done background research on him and had found out that he was a gigolo who wasted his worthless life flattering rich women. Fed up with the insult, Zhu Fei snapped back, saying he was aware that his family's living conditions were worse than a church rat, but at least he still got his dignity as a man, which was one thing no mofo could trample on. After giving the wicked witch a piece of his mind, he stormed out. Ziachu tried to follow him, but her mom held her back. Just then, a random dude came to inform them that the old man was awake, which brightened up their faces. On the other hand, Zhu Fei walked home furious at the manner in which he and his family had been rudely roasted by Ziachu's mom. It was obvious to him that what stood in the way of him and Ziachu was still very much there. Coming from the other side of the road was Gao Yang, holding a red box containing the overpriced ginseng he had just purchased from the black market. He was certain that with this purchase, the Ziachu's family would definitely force Ziachu to marry him. Suddenly, both guys bumped into each other head first. Pissed, Gao Yang wondered who the blind idiot was that had crashed into him. As his eyes widened, he realized that the blind idiot was Zhu Fei. He was shocked to his core, having assumed that Zhu Fei should have been dead after falling from the top of the school building. With a lifeless stare, Zhu Fei said he was dead, but now he's back. Before the guy could gather his thoughts, Zhu Fei gave him a decisive uppercut to his jaw, crashing him to the ground. After that, Zhu Fei told him he was back to tell him that a hypocrite like him was no match for Ziachu. Gao Yang, now totally battered in the face, continued to insist that it was impossible for Ziachu to be alive. He should be chilling with the devil in hell by now. But Zhu Fei slammed his ugly face with his knee and warned him to stay far away from Ziachu and never again provoke him. Suddenly, a voice shouted in the distance, ordering Zhu Fei to stop. It was Ziachu's evil mother who yelled at Zhu Fei, asking him how dare he beat someone in front of the hospital. Furiously, she exclaimed that Ziachu was young and naive, which was why she was easily deceived by a violent and hypocritical man like Zhu Fei. Gao Yang immediately rushed to meet Ziachu's mother like a pathetic crybaby and nervously said Zhu Fei was a ghost. The woman admitted that if he was a ghost, he was one ugly, broke ghost. She turned to Gao Yang and asked if he had come to deliver ginseng, to which Gao Yang replied yes. Handing it to her, Gao Yang explained that his housekeeper had purchased it in an auction in Western Europe. With that, the woman turned to Zhu Fei and said he was no savior because Gao Yang had proved himself to be helpful also. She then pulled out a white envelope containing a check for $1 million, $500,000 for the ginseng, and another $500,000 to stay away from Ziachu. She coldly advised Zhu Fei to take the deal while he still had the chance. Our guy collected the money, wondering how a common root could be worth so much. As he began to leave, Zia Chu's mom shouted, asking him to take the money and never show his washed-up face ever again. While walking back to school, Zhu Fei began to regret ever taking the money. He understood that taking the money meant Zia Chu would probably start seeing him as a gold digger. At that moment, he spotted a dude in front of a donation box, asking for donations. So, he approached the guy and offered to donate the $1 million, leaving the guy speechless. Overjoyed, the dude asked if he truly wanted to donate such a huge amount of money. In response, Zhu Fei asked if he wasn't allowed to donate that much. The guy said no, that it wasn't what he was trying to say, and then he asked Zhu Fei to drop his name for some advertisement. In the next scene, Zhu Fei was already in school. Inside his room, his roommates noticed that he looked downcasted, so one of them asked if his sadness was because of the ginseng root Zia Chu had asked for. However, Zhu Fei informed them that Zia Chu's old man was better now, and from now on, he and Zia Chu were history. Hearing this, the boys felt so sorry for him and offered to get drinks so they could all drink away their sorrows. After drinking 50 bottles of beer that night, the boys were wasted. While sleeping, the golden energy began to form all around Zhu Fei, and in a blink of an eye, he was teleported to the ancient world. As he lay on the ground like a lifeless log, a roach crawled up toward his face, jolting him out of his slumber. Startled, his eyes widened, only to realize with shock that he had been teleported. He immediately sat up, and that was when he realized he was still in prison. Suddenly, someone shouted that the Marquis was back. Zhu Fei hurriedly stood up, scared out of his mind that if Huang Fu found out what had happened, she wouldn't hesitate to neuter his eggplant. He also noticed that his legs had been bound with chains to prevent him from escaping. Suddenly, behind him, Huang Fu burst into the prison, and noticing this, Zhu Fei started to sweat bullets. He quickly knelt before her, begging that it was all a misunderstanding, and it was actually the thirsty maid who had forced herself on him. With a cold and lifeless stare, Huang Fu gripped her sword tightly, and for that moment, our boy froze in sheer fear. He began to cry worse than a girl, begging her not to act impulsively but rather give him a chance to explain. But Huang Fu made a swift move with her blade, and at that instant, Zhu Fei blanked out after seeing Heaven's Gate. He collapsed to the ground with foam in his mouth, but when he finally regained consciousness, he wondered why his heart was still beating. He sat up just as the old man Fu walked in, and it was then he realized that Huang Fu had actually cut the chains binding his legs. Huang Fu turned to the old keeper and asked if it was his first time managing her mansion. Old man Fu replied, saying he had been managing the mansion for 30 years. Huang Fu said that since he had been managing the mansion for 30 years, he should have known better than to punish her husband. The old, scrawny man with his feet and head on the floor then begged her to calm down. The old man explained that since she was known for upholding the reputation of the Marquis mansion, he had assumed that her husband's action would affect the reputation of the mansion. With a smile, Huang Fu confidently affirmed that she believed her husband, insisting that the maid must have seduced him. She then ordered the maid involved to be expelled from the mansion immediately. After this, she instructed Fu to give the mansion keys to Zhu Fei and firmly stated that from that moment on, Zhu Fei would be in charge of her mansion. With that, the old man handed the key to the mansion over to Zhu Fei. Huang Fu then turned over to Zhu Fei and remarked that anything he didn't understand, he could ask Fu. Also, she pointed out that apart from her and her grandfather, he was the biggest in the mansion. She also assured him that anyone who dared to offend him outside the royal family would have her to contend with. At that moment, Zhu Fei stared at her and realized that the chick wasn't only beautiful, she was also a feisty one. However, he told her that he would listen to the Marquis's instructions. But Huang Fu simply said he was funny and then pointed out that only outsiders called her Marquis. For him, however, they would call each other by their names. She then turned towards the direction of the door and asked Zhu Fei to accompany her to her room, causing the virgin to nearly have a heart attack. On getting inside the room, Huang Fu began to strip, but Zhu Fei screamed, asking that he go out first before she did that. But she turned, telling him that now they were husband and wife, and since she was in the military, she didn't have to be pretentious like other ladies. After changing her clothes, she placed her sword on the table and then demanded to know what really transpired between him and the thirsty maid. Zhu Fei asked why she was even asking, considering she already knew the answer. However, Huang Fu sipped from a glass and said she only knew roughly and would love to know the full gist. Zhu Fei then asked why she had let him out and if she wasn't afraid that he might have truly molested the girl. With a cold stare, Huang Fu asked Zhu Fei if he really molested the girl. Zhu Fei panicked a little and then pointed out that he was still a virgin, but she had no idea what he was talking about. However, he assured her that he didn't molest the girl, and Huang Fu said she believed him. Turning to the side, Zhu Fei demanded to know why she trusted him so much without even knowing the full story. Huang Fu answered, saying it was because they had one mind. She then told Zhu Fei that if he really liked the maid, he could have her as a concubine. Upon hearing this, Zhu Fei was shocked. He then asked if he could also have a concubine. Huang Fu explained that even though everyone in the world saw her as an alpha female, all she ever wanted was not even a rich husband, but a husband that would be of one mind with her. She told him that if they could be of one mind, she could care less if he had 1,000,000 concubines. Hearing this, Zhu Fei fell silent and thought to himself that a righteous, sensible, and beautiful woman like Huang Fu needed a man who would love her unconditionally. So, he placed his hand on his chest and swore that as long as he remained husband, he would never take a concubine. He then leaned close to her and whispered all that had transpired between him and the maid. After hearing all that had happened, Huang Fu angrily threw a mug on the floor and shouted how dared those bastards enter the inner mansion of the Marquis. She then clenched her fist in anger and assured Zhu Fei that she would handle the situation herself. Just then, a lady of the court entered, announcing that there was a magical box in the woodshed that needed to be looked at. Hearing this, Zhu Fei was startled, whispering to himself that it could be the beer he had brought over. Huang Fu then turned and asked what beer. Let's go back a few hours after Zhu Fei had just teleported. He sat in front of a crate of beer, wondering how he had crossed over. Even shocked, he realized that he could cross over with anything in his hand. He held the can of beer in his hand, pondering the possibility that he wasn't crossing over, but rather traveling between worlds. Surprisingly, anytime he traveled, he could bring along with him anything he held in his hand. Placing his hand on his chin, he thought of the idea of teleporting back with a bucket of the ginseng root and sell them in his world for millions. He knew there were also treasures in the Marquis mansion, which could also be sold for exorbitant prices. He smiled as he finally understood that with his new business, his broke status would not be able to stand in his way of getting Xia Chu. Overjoyed, our boy screamed, saying now was his time to make a great fortune and have his name on the Forbes list. Back in the present, someone shouted, calling for the old housekeeper. It turned out to be our guy who ordered old man Fu to take him to the Marquis mansion treasury. He lied, telling the gullible old man that the reason for going there was because he wanted to take into account the treasures in the mansion. Once the old man agreed to take him to the treasury, he smiled like a useless thief because this was his perfect plan to steal some of the treasures. On getting to the treasury door, Zhu Fei concluded that all he wanted was a Longan pearl or a blood jade wench that could be auctioned for tens of millions of dollars. On opening the treasury door, Zhu Fei was shocked to oblivion when he realized that the place was emptier than his skull. He immediately grabbed the old disgusting man by the collar, asking if he was the thief responsible for stealing all the treasures, but the old geezer said he wouldn't dare do such even if he had 9 lives like a cat. So, he then asked the man to explain what had happened to the treasures. Fu asked him to chill, and then clarified that while other monarchs and marquises were stinky rich, Huang Fu had invested all her money in her military, making them the elite of the Great Kingdom. But even after doing so, the current emperor had zero trust for her, and even other aristocratic families were targeting her. Zhu Fei then asked the old man to bring the account books of the mansion, as well as the items of various shops. As the old man left, Zhu Fei placed his hand over his head in frustration because he had never thought that his dream of becoming filthy rich would be so difficult. Later that day, Zhu Fei roared out the name of the old keeper. Old man Fu immediately rushed to meet him and told him that the account book was still being compiled. But Zhu Fei grabbed him by the shoulder and said he hadn't called him for the account books. What he wanted was for him to show him where he could find a lot of weed. The old man then took him to a forest filled with medicinal herbs, and Zhu Fei was extremely delighted when he found ginseng of 20 years old and even 50 years old Ganoderma. Noticing how excited Zhu Fei was, like a kid that had just discovered the candy shop, the old man and his companion whispered, asking each other if their marquis had mistakenly married an asylum escapee. After gathering bags filled with herbal items, Zhu Fei said it was time to head home. He handed the bags filled with herbs to the old keeper and then instructed him to take the bag to his room. Zhu Fei understood that if he intended to travel with the herbs, then he needed to keep them close to him in his bedroom when it was time to sleep. Old man Fu then asked if it was okay to take the weeds to the bedroom where he and the marquis would be sleeping. Startled, Zhu Fei said it was his bedroom he was referring to. But the old man calmly stated that since he didn't have a mansion of his own, it was customary that if he stayed in the Marquis's mansion, then he would have to sleep in the Marquis's bedroom. Pissed, Zhu Fei locked eyes with the old man and said that, at an advanced age, it wasn't right for couples who weren't yet married to sleep together in the same room. But while holding his chin, Zhu Fei thought about how single he had been for years, and clapping the beautiful Marquis would be a dream come true. However, he felt it was too sudden. Suddenly, his head was hit by the hoof of a horse, almost taking out his eyes and causing him to spill blood. It was Huang Fu, sitting on a horse, who demanded to know the reason he had refused to stay in the same room with her. She then asked if it was because of the virginity he had talked about. Zhu Fei, now with a bloody face, replied, saying he felt it was too abrupt. Huang Fu then said since it wasn't a problem they could sleep together. She casually remarked that for the weeds, he could hug and sleep with them. She couldn't care less since she was in the wild most of the time. Later that night, Zhu Fei sat on the bed wondering how he had suddenly become the woman in his weird marriage. Just then, Huang Fu stepped out of the bathroom dressed in a suscloth. Seeing her, Zhu Fei immediately used his eyes to measure the length of her clothes, and realizing how short they were, he almost peed himself from mere thinking he would be losing his virginity that very night. He then asked her to chill first and have a conversation. At that moment, a mini-sized angel appeared on his shoulders, asking him to keep his virginity for his love Ziachu. But the pen-sized devil on his shoulders instructed him to milk her cheeks and stop being a sissy. Sweating profusely, Zhu Fei exclaimed that it was too sudden. Do you think the protagonist and the Marquis would cultivate each other's plots? Comment Business Tycoon if you're eager to find out in our part 2. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more content like this. As always, thanks for watching.